Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. I already had respect for anyone working in the dementia field of nursing, but after that, I honestly don't know how they get through the day. No words I can offer would put a dent in that pain and suffering. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Don't lie to the residents. So about 3 years ago, I worked for a care home. I still do work for a care home, but I also did 3 years ago. It's primarily nursing care with a little dementia care. The residents can range from being totally independent and capable of going about their day with minimal assistance from staff to end-of-life care with checks every half hour to make sure there's always someone with them. The particular resident I'm going to be talking about here we'll call Dot because she looked like the EastEnders character of the same name, only with a thick Liverpudlian accent. Dot had a great sense of pride and a low tolerance for anyone who she believed was talking down to her. She was largely independent, just had a few funny turns here and there. I was working a night shift when this happened, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and it was around midnight. My colleague was setting up breakfast trays for the morning, I believe, whilst the nurse was doing a few clerical duties. We had a nurse from an agency due to ours being ill. Agency workers can be a mixed bag here. Some are lovely, hardworking, and understanding. Some are grumpy and uptight. Some we politely ask if they don't get sent again. The nurse that night fell squarely into the middle category. She would be snippy with the care staff, opting to do her work without any communication to us unless it was absolutely necessary to hand anything over to us. Fair enough, nobody says you have to make friends here, and would treat the residents with a false smile and a semi-condescending tone. Sort of like you'd expect one to use when talking to small children. Dot was going through one of her funny turns. She had put her coat on and was trying to barge her way out of the front door. I came across the reception area to find the nurse trying to talk to Dot, with Dot trying to get to the front door saying, "Get out of the way, you miserable old trout," to the nurse. The nurse was saying things like, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Dot, but we need to look after you here. It'd be irresponsible of us to allow you to wander about outside at this time. You could seriously hurt yourself. Look, it's dark out." All things that seemed to make Dot angrier and angrier. After a while, Dot stormed off. I asked the nurse why Dot wanted to get out of the home. Because she has dementia. Yeah, but why in her own mind is she trying to leave? In her mind, it makes perfect sense for her to leave the home. What's her reasoning? Oh, she wants to go to the pharmacy. What difference does that make? We can't allow the residents out unsupervised for any reason, and especially not in the dead of night. I'll talk to her. No, you will not. I know how people like you work. You'll say anything to keep the residents happy, even if it means filling their heads with lies. Well, I was taught that we have to be honest with the residents. And this is true. You can't tell a resident an outright lie, at least not where I work. If a resident with dementia is distraught because their mother hasn't given them a phone call, you cannot say to them something like, "Oh, but she did ring you about a couple of hours ago, remember?" However, it's kind of frowned upon to say something like, "Your mother died 20 years ago." Dead people can't use the telephone. Honest as it may be, you have to learn to use tact, omit details if they could cause distress, and treat the residents with some modicum of dignity. Anyway, somehow I convinced the nurse to let me speak to Dot. The nurse said that if she sees me lie to Dot, she'll file a report and see that the home manager knows I am institutionalizing the residents, which is a very, very serious accusation here. We made our way to Dot's room. She's angrily stuffing things into her handbag at the time. The nurse folded her arms and stood in the doorway as I spoke to Dot. "Dot? What do you want, my name? What are you getting all dressed up for? Is something special happening? I need to get to the pharmacy. They have my medicine." "But Dot, it's Sunday. The pharmacy isn't open on Sunday." Dot stopped in her tracks. For the first time, she looked confused rather than angry. "Is it?" "Yes, Dot. Look, here's your clock. It says today's date on it, and it says Sunday, see?" Dot made a sheepish face to this. "Oh, oops. I suppose I'd better get settled. I do actually feel rather sleepy." I left Dot to it. When I walked out the door, the nurse is stunned that I handled it so easily. She tried to sputter out that it was still filling the resident's head with lies for the sake of a quiet life. I just asked her, "What day is it right now?" She didn't have an answer. The nurse tried to speak to my colleague about my behavior later that night. My colleague basically told her what I did was the same thing she would have done. When Dot had her funny turn, she would argue with you about the time of day, how safe it was outside, etc. But as you got to know the residents, you got to know what kind of advice they'd be willing to listen to. Anyway, there's the time an angry resident calmed down and a grouchy nurse got egg on her face. Hope you enjoyed. I think you handled that perfectly. Old sour nurse was just pissed you showed her she doesn't know everything. And our second story. This lady even followed me to my work. Yesterday, after finishing up a grueling shift at the restaurant I worked at, I remembered just then that I had to swing by a store for some items before I went home. I contemplated going home to change out of my uniform, but I figured that if I went home, I'd be too lazy to leave again. My uniform consisted of a polo or button-down shirt with khakis and a name tag pinned to my shirt. I drove over to the store, and as I was walking in the store, I take off my name tag and put it in my pocket so that people won't just see a name tag and think I work there, even though my name tag also said the name of the restaurant. I'm browsing the store for the particular items I wanted, and this lady was just staring at me. I was looking at her through my peripheral vision my whole time, and she wasn't moving at all, just staring at me. I got weirded out, so I turned toward her so I could walk past her. As I was passing her, she gave me a disgusted look and says, "Excuse me, I'm looking at you because I needed help, and you just look at me and pass me by? How dare you?" Absolutely tired of all the stress from my own job, I just reply, "It's because I don't work here, ma'am." She obviously was too infuriated at me to believe me at all. "Don't give me excuses. Now tell me if you have more of some random item." I was tired, hungry, and ready to take a nice nap at home, so I wasn't going to let this lady impede me from doing so. So I snapped at her. "Look, lady, I already told you that I don't work here. Even if I did, you shouldn't just stare at me expecting me to help you and get all offended if I don't." I then remembered that I had my name tag in my pocket. I take it out and show her, "Look, I work at restaurant, not here. Now please let me get the things I wanted and I'll leave." As soon as I showed her my name tag, she became quiet. But you can see the anger and rage in her eyes. I check out and go home. All this happened yesterday. Now, fast forward to today, it doesn't stop here. This morning, I was a couple hours into my shift and I was at the front. My manager just happened to be there with me at the time. All of a sudden, a familiar lady walks in. The same lady who was yelling at me yesterday. Immediately, I think, is this a coincidence? Or did she actually follow me here? Then I remembered showing her my name tag, which also had the restaurant's name on it, so I'm guessing she just remembered where I worked. She walks to the front desk and looks at my manager. "Are you the manager?" "Yes, I am," he replies. "Well, I want to talk to you about your employee here," she says, pointing at me. She then goes on to say how much of an inconsiderate and rude person I am, and she told him what happened at the store and how my manager shouldn't have an employee like me working here. My manager replies, "I'm sorry you had that experience, but I'm not responsible for anything he does outside of working hours." He gives me a look of, "I got your back, bro," and the lady just yells at us. "Well, I'm never eating at this place that lets people like him," pointing at me again, "work here." And then she storms out of the building, hopefully never to be seen or heard from again. JC, that lady's crazy. Thank God your manager had your back. And our last story. Driveway revenge. My grandmother lives in a suburb of Chicago very close to the city. The lots are all 25 by 125, with a few exceptions, and pretty densely packed. Her neighbor is the only person on the block, maybe even in the whole town, who has a second lot. Because of the strange configuration of the street, his second lot is 35 by 125, which gives him a very nice side yard. My grandmother lives on the east side of this guy, and a Mexican family lives on the west side next to the empty lot. Grandma got all the juicy details because she and the neighbor moved in on the same day in 1958 and have been close friends ever since. The garages on this block are directly behind the houses, and there's an alley. Neighbor built his garage with overhead doors on the front and back of his garage in case he ever decided to put in a side drive across his empty lot. In 60 years, he never did, by the way. Enough backstory and build-up. Neighbor sees Mexican guy chopping a giant hole in the garage. He asks what's up, and the Mexican guy says he's going to install a door just like neighbor guy's. Neighbor guy wishes him luck and assumes it's just to open up the garage because they throw an extraordinary amount of backyard parties.
Neighbor guy goes on a golfing trip for 2 weeks and takes his wife. He returns to find an asphalt driveway running along Mexican guy's house. It's cutting into his empty lot by about 10 to 12 feet. He immediately goes to confront Mexican guy, who claims that the edge of the driveway is on the property line. He pulls out a bad copy of the survey from when he bought the house and shows that part of the empty lot belongs to Mexican guy. Neighbor guy notices that some of the lines and numbers look funny. Mexican guy must have modified the survey and copied it a few times to make it look more legit. Remember, this is the mid-'80s, so Xeroxing several times back then was like Photoshop blending now. Neighbor guy loses his crap, hunts down his own survey, confronts Mexican guy again, and Mexican guy basically says, "Yeah, you got me. You don't even use the empty lot, and I don't like the potholes in the alley." By the way, he doctored up the survey because the driveway contractors wouldn't lay the driveway without one. Neighbor guy and Mexican guy go at it for weeks. Mexican guy eventually just says, "F you, deal with it." Neighbor guy is stressed to hell over this. He had a heart attack during this time, and I have a feeling this driveway crap was partly to blame. Well, about a year goes by, and they no longer speak to one another. Mexican guy assumes he's in the clear since neighbor guy seems to have dropped the issue, and they haven't spoken in many months. Mexican guy packs up the family and heads to Mexico for a couple weeks. Neighbor guy decides to act. Neighbor guy calls in a surveyor to mark the lot. He discovers that the lot line is less than 2 feet off Mexican guy's house. He always assumed it was 3 feet. He then calls a fencing company. He has a fence installed around the empty lot right through the driveway and directly on the lot line. Mexican guy comes back and throws a fit. Neighbor guy just says, "F you, deal with it." In the end, Mexican guy went from a 3-foot walkway to a lavish 12 to 15-foot driveway and then back down to a 20-inch walkway. What's even more wonderful about this is that Mexican guy has his air conditioner and skinny garden on the other side of his house, so unless he moved an air conditioner in his garden, this tiny walkway next to the empty lot's fence was his only way from getting to the front to the back without going through the house. Neighbor guy eventually had the driveway removed and landscaped the lot, although he waited about 5 years. I assume he waited just so Mexican guy could see it every day. He also sued for the cost of removing 100 feet of asphalt and laying sod. Mexican guy didn't pay, so a lien was put on Mexican guy's house. I believe it was for either $8,000 or $12,000. Mexican guy eventually moved, and neighbor guy got paid for the lien out of the sale proceeds. But the fence and skinny walkway still stand to this day.
Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.